So I guess we are now live. Welcome to the open debate. This is what democracy looks like, and this is what democracy sounds like. And this is what you, the American people, have been clamoring for. Over 75% of American voters have been saying they want more voices and more choices than the two corporate political parties and their two establishment candidates, which are the most unpopular and the most disliked in the history of our presidential elections. And the American people are clamoring for something else. So we are here tonight to bring you something else. I want to give a big thank you to Twitter and to Periscope for enabling us to actually liberate the debates and to open up the debates with more voices and more choices. So just a question to our facilitators tonight. Would you like for us to hold off for the first question at this point? It sounds like the proceedings are beginning.
Yes. So let us tune into the debate and.
The commission drafted tonight's format, and the rules have been agreed to by the campaigns. The 90-minute debate is divided into 6 segments, each 15 minutes long. We'll explore 3 topic areas tonight: achieving prosperity, America's direction, and securing America. At the start of each segment, I will ask the same lead-off question to both candidates, and they will each have up to 2 minutes to respond. From that point until the end of the segment, we'll have an open discussion. The questions are mine and have not been shared with the commission or the campaigns. The audience here in the room has agreed to remain silent so that we can focus on what the candidates are saying. I will invite you to applaud, however, at this moment as we welcome the candidates. Democratic nominee for President of the United States, Hillary Clinton, and Republican nominee for President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Expect us to cover all the issues of this campaign tonight, but I remind everyone there are 2 more presidential debates scheduled. We are going to focus on many of the issues that voters tell us are most important, and we're going to press for specifics. I am honored to have this role, but this evening belongs to the candidates and just as important to the American people. Candidates, we look forward to hearing you articulate your policies and your positions, as well as your visions and your values. So, let's begin. We're calling this opening segment Achieving Prosperity, and central to that is jobs. There are 2 economic realities in America today. There's been a record 6 straight years of job growth, and new census numbers show incomes have increased at a record rate after years of stagnation. However, income inequality remains significant, and nearly half of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Beginning with you, Secretary Clinton, why are you a better choice than your opponent to create the kinds of jobs that will put more money into the pockets of American workers?
Well, thank you, Lester, and thanks to Hofstra for hosting us. The central question in this election is really what kind of country we want to be and what kind of future we'll build together. Today is my granddaughter's 2nd birthday, so I think about this a lot. First, we have to build an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. That means we need new jobs, good jobs, with rising incomes. I want us to invest in you. I want us to invest in your future. That means jobs in infrastructure, in advanced manufacturing, in innovation and technology, clean renewable energy, and small business, because most of the new jobs will come from small business. We also have to make the economy fairer. That starts with raising the national minimum wage and also guarantee, finally, equal pay for women's work. I also want to see more companies do profit sharing. If you help create the profits, you should be able to share in them, not just the executives at the top. And I want us to do more to support people who are struggling to balance family and work. I've heard from so many of you about the difficult choices you face and the stresses that you're under. So let's have paid family leave, earned sick days. Let's be sure we have affordable child care and debt-free college. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it by having the wealthy pay their fair share and close the corporate loopholes. Finally, we tonight are on the stage together, Donald Trump and I. Donald, it's good to be with you. We're going to have a debate where we are talking about the important issues facing our country. You have to judge us. Who can shoulder the immense, awesome responsibilities of the presidency? Who can put into action the plans that will make your life better? I hope that I will be able to earn your vote on November 8th.
Secretary Clinton, thank you. Mr. Trump, the same question to you. It's about putting money, more money, into the pockets of American workers. You have up to 2 minutes.
Thank you, Lester. Our jobs are fleeing the country. They're going to Mexico. They're going to many other countries. You look at what China is doing to our country in terms of making our product. They're devaluing their currency, and there's nobody in our government to fight them. And we have a very good fight, and we have a winning fight, because they're using our country as a piggy bank to rebuild China, and many other countries are doing the same thing. So we're losing our good jobs, so many of them. When you look at what's happening in Mexico, a friend of mine who builds plants said it's the 8th wonder of the world. They're building some of the biggest plants anywhere in the world, some of the most sophisticated, some of the best plants. With the United States, as you said, not so much. So Ford is leaving. You see that, their small car division leaving. Thousands of jobs, leaving Michigan, leaving Ohio. They're all leaving, and we can't allow it to happen anymore. As far as child care is concerned and so many other things, I think Hillary and I agree on that. We probably disagree a little bit as to numbers and amounts and what we're going to do, but perhaps we'll be talking about that later. But we have to stop our jobs from being stolen from us. We have to stop our companies from leaving the United States, and with it, firing all of their people. All you have to do is take a look at Carrier Air Conditioning in Indianapolis. They fired 1,400 people. They're going to Mexico. So many, hundreds and hundreds of companies are doing this. We cannot let it happen. Under my plan, I'll be reducing taxes tremendously, from 35% to 15% for companies, small and big businesses. That's going to be a job creator like we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan. It's going to be a beautiful thing to watch. Companies will come, they will build, they will expand, new companies will start, and I look very, very much forward to doing it. We have to renegotiate our trade deals, and we have to stop these countries from stealing our companies and our jobs.
Secretary Clinton, would you like to respond?
Well, I think that trade is...
Right. So we do indeed need jobs, and part of the reason we have lost jobs is certainly on account of NAFTA. And while Secretary Clinton supported NAFTA, Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, Donald Trump was actually busy offshoring his own jobs. In fact, every manufactured product that Donald Trump markets is an offshored manufactured item. So when it comes to offshoring jobs, Donald Trump knows all about that because he's been doing it. In fact, he even advised that companies close their factories, move somewhere else in order to then come back and be able to push lower wages on the workers. And in fact, that is what NAFTA has accomplished. Not only losing us well over 1 million jobs, some say as much as 3 and 4 million, but also putting downward pressure on wages. So we're actually calling for the antidote to NAFTA. And my administration would create a Green New Deal, like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. So this is not rocket science. This is not a hypothetical. This is something that we do. It calls for investing in people, investing in the real economy. We call for 20 million good wage, living wage jobs that will transition us to 100% clean renewable energy, a healthy and sustainable food system, as well as public, energy efficient, renewably powered transportation, and restoring our ecosystems. This revives our economy. It turns the tide on climate change. It actually revives our health. We save so much money. from improved health, that alone is enough to pay the costs of the Green New Deal. And finally, achieving 100% renewable energy by 2030 enables us to make the wars for oil obsolete, which in turn puts hundreds of billions of dollars into true security here at home.
That our country needs. Our country's in deep trouble. We don't know what we're doing when it comes to devaluations, and all of these countries all over the world, especially China, they're the best ever at it. What they're doing to us is a very, very sad thing. So we have to do that. We have to renegotiate our trade deals. Unless they're taking our jobs, they're giving incentives, they're doing things that, frankly, we don't do. Let me give you the example of Mexico. They have a VAT tax. We're in a different system. When we sell into Mexico, there's a tax. When they sell in automatic, 16% approximately. When they sell into us, there's no tax. It's a defective agreement. It's been defective for a long time, many years, but the politicians haven't done anything about it. Now, in all fairness to Secretary Clinton, yes, is that okay? Good. I want you to be very happy. It's very important to me. But in all fairness to Secretary Clinton, when she started talking about this, it was really very recently. She's been doing this for 30 years. And why hasn't she made the agreements better? The NAFTA agreement is defective just because of the tax and many other reasons, but just because of the tax.
Let me interrupt you a moment.
Secretary Clinton and others, politicians, should have been doing this for years. Not right now because of the fact that we've created a movement. They should have been doing this for years. What's happened to our jobs and our country and our economy generally is, look, we owe $20 trillion. We cannot do it any longer, Lester.
Back to the question, though, how do you specifically bring back jobs? American manufacturers, how do you make them bring the jobs back?
Well, the first thing you do is don't let the jobs leave. The companies are leaving. I could name, there are thousands of them. They're leaving, and they're leaving in bigger numbers than ever. And what you do is you say, fine.
So again, on this question of how we bring the jobs back, Donald Trump, has been leading the pack in taking his jobs overseas. So perhaps he'll bring that knowledge into the presidency. Let's hope he doesn't have a chance to do that. But in terms of bringing the jobs back, this is why we call for the right to a job, why we call for a Green New Deal. We also call for a tax system in which we are taxing overseas profits. Right now, the trade agreements actually give tax advantages to corporations that take their jobs overseas. So yes, we do need to renegotiate these trade agreements, not to create trade barriers, but rather to create trade based on what works for workers on both sides of the border, what will protect our environment, what will protect our health. We need trade agreements that are for people, not for boosting corporate profits.
Back in 2006, I hope it does collapse because then I can go in and buy some and make some money. Well, it did collapse.
That's called business, by the way.
9 million people lost their jobs. 5 million people lost their homes, and $13 trillion in family wealth was wiped out. Now, we have come back from that abyss, and it has not been easy. So we're now on the precipice of having a potentially much better economy. But the last thing we need to do is to go back to the policies that failed us in the first place. Independent experts have looked at what I've...
So let's talk about where these policies came from that led to the Wall Street meltdown. In fact, this was a consequence of Wall Street deregulation that laid the groundwork for the waste, fraud, and abuse on Wall Street, for the predatory lending, for the unethical bundling of these insecure investment packages, and their peddling to unsuspecting consumers. That grew directly out of Wall Street deregulation, which was brought to us by none other than Bill Clinton with the support of Hillary Clinton. So that's why, another Clinton in the White House is not the solution to the economic crisis that not only is throwing people under the bus, but is also leading to the right-wing extremism, like Donald Trump and others, which is very much a response to the economic hardships created by that Wall Street meltdown. And Hillary Clinton, remember, continues to be a good friend to the big banks, has brought in, $600,000 in speaking fees to the big banks alone, and still refuses to reveal the content of those speeches. So remember, don't just listen to the talk, look at the walk. Let's not go down that road again. Thank you.
Never going back to what got us in trouble in the first place.
Mr. Trump.
She talks about solar panels. We invested in a solar company, our country. That was a disaster. They lost plenty of money on that one. Now, look, I'm a great believer in all forms of energy, but we're putting a lot of people out of work. Our energy policies are a disaster. Our country is losing so much in terms of energy, in terms of paying off our debt. You can't do what you're looking to do with $20 trillion in debt. The Obama administration, from the time they've come in, is over 230 years worth of...
So let's be clear, that loan guarantee program to support clean renewable energy is actually in the black. There was one transient loss that Donald Trump was referring to, but the program on the whole is enormously successful because renewable energy is where it's at. It's also where the money is at. It is creating jobs at 12 times the rate of the rest of the economy right now. Jobs in solar and in wind in particular are growing very fast. People know that this is the right thing to do, and this is where the new economy lies. I might also say this is where our survival lies, because the science is very clear now. In fact, a report last week, this Oil Change International report, is that we have 17 years actually to zero out fossil fuels. Not only are they deadly for our health, but they are deadly for our climate, and the day of catastrophic impact is coming closer. So this is not something to think about for the future. This is a state of emergency. Our administration, a green administration, will declare a climate emergency, the emergency that we are in, and that will move to create the jobs that we need right now. So people in the fossil fuel industry are not going to be out of a job. You're going to be into a far better job. In fact, it's the fossil fuel workers right now who are really on in the target hairs of the terrible health impacts. Their risk of dying on the job, in fact, is 700% higher the minute they walk in the door of that refinery or that fracking site or get in a truck to drive the fuel. So we got jobs, lots more jobs, and jobs that are good for you, for the economy, and for the planet.
I think it is a part of it, and I've said what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a special prosecutor. We're going to enforce the trade deals we have, and we're going to hold people accountable. When I was Secretary of State, we actually increased American exports globally 30%. We increased them to China 50%. So I know how to really work to get new jobs and to get exports that help to create more new jobs.
Right, well, you haven't done it in 30 years or 26 years.
Well, I've been a senator.
You haven't done it.
And
You haven't
I
done
have
it.
been a
And
Secretary of State, and I have
Your
done
husband signed
a lot.
NAFTA, which was one of the worst things that ever happened
Well,
to the
that's your
manufacturing
opinion.
industry.
That is your
You go to
opinion.
New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country. And now you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership.
So let's just remember, as Donald Trump is railing against Hillary Clinton for her support for NAFTA, let's just remember that Donald Trump himself has offshored his jobs, encouraged other companies to do so, and suggested how they might do that in such a way as to lower wages for their workers. So, you need to take what he says with a grain of salt. It's very important that we go back and renegotiate NAFTA, that we do, in fact, end these incentives that currently exist, tax and insurance incentives that are part of these trade deals that encourage people to offshore. But we need to develop our jobs here. We need a productive economy here. That's why we call for investing in American jobs and in our Green New Deal, which will create the right to a job for every American who is ready to go to work. We have a full-time job for you, not only in small businesses, also worker cooperatives and nonprofits. And in addition, we call for ending student debt, and this too is one of the ways to restore our jobs and our economy. We have an entire generation of young people right now who are locked into predatory student loan debt without a way to get out of it, having largely low-wage, temporary, insecure jobs that have come back. We need to create those good jobs. And part of the way we do that is by unleashing young people from this debt. Democrats and Republicans decided to bail out Wall Street, the crooks who crashed the economy with their waste, fraud, and abuse. They came up with $16 trillion to bail out Wall Street. If they could bail out the crooks who crashed the economy, it's time to bail out the young people who are held hostage by this unfair student loan debt and by an economy that is on the skids. This is the stimulus package of our dreams, to unleash the people who are trained, they're ready to go, and to create the new economy of the 21st century.
Tremendous numbers of new jobs. But regulations, you are going to regulate these businesses out of existence. When I go around, Lester, I tell you this, I've been all over. And when I go around, despite the tax cut, the things that businesses and people like the most is the fact that I'm cutting regulation. You have regulations on top of regulations, and new companies cannot form, and old companies are going out of business, and you want to increase the regulations and make them even worse. I'm going to cut regulations, but I'm going to cut taxes big league, and you're going to raise taxes big league. End of story.
Let me get you to pause right there, because we're going to move into the next segment. We're going to talk taxes.
That can't be left
Please,
to stand.
take 30 seconds.
I kind of assumed that there would be a lot of these charges and claims. And so
Facts.
we have taken the homepage of my website, HillaryClinton.com, and we've turned it into a fact checker. So if you want to see in real time what the facts are, please go and take a look. Because
And take a look at mine also,
would
and you'll
not
see.
add a penny to the debt, and your plans would add $5 trillion to the debt. What I have proposed would cut regulations and streamline them for small businesses. What I have proposed would be paid for by raising taxes on the wealthy, because they have made all the gains in the economy. And I think it's time that the wealthy and corporations paid their fair share to support this.
Well, you just opened the next segment.
Well, look, I just finished. I think I should.
I'm going to
You go to her website and you take a look at her website. She's going to raise taxes $1.3 trillion.
Mr. Trump,
and look at her website. You know what? It's no different than this. She's telling us how to fight ISIS. Just go to her website. She tells you how to fight ISIS on her website. I don't think General Douglas MacArthur would like that too much.
The next segment, we're continuing
Well,
the
at
subject
least
of
I have a plan to fight
achieving
ISIS.
No, you're telling the enemy everything you want to do.
No, we're not.
See, you're telling the enemy everything you want to do. No wonder you've been fighting. No wonder you've been fighting ISIS your entire adult life.
Folks,
That's go to the fact checkers. Get
folks,
to work.
we were unpacking a lot here, and we're still in the issue of achieving prosperity. And I want to talk about taxes. The fundamental difference between the two of you concerns the wealthy. Secretary Clinton, you're calling for a tax increase in the wealthiest Americans. I'd like you to further defend that. And Mr. Trump, you're calling for tax cuts for the wealthy. I'd like you to defend that. And this next 2-minute answer goes to you, Mr. Trump.
Well, I'm really calling for major jobs, because the wealthy are going to create tremendous jobs. They're going to expand their companies. They're going to do a tremendous job. I'm getting rid of the carried interest provision. And if you really look, it's not a tax. It's really not a great thing for the wealthy. It's a great thing for the middle class. It's a great thing for companies to expand. And when these people are going to put billions and billions of dollars into companies, and when they're going to bring $2.5 trillion back from overseas where they can't bring the money back because politicians like Secretary Clinton won't allow them to bring the money back because the taxes are so onerous and the bureaucratic red tape so what is so bad. So what they're doing is they're leaving our country, and they're, believe it or not, leaving because taxes are too high and because some of them have lots of money outside of our country, and instead of bringing it back and putting the money to work because they can't work out a deal to, and everybody agrees it should be brought back, instead of that, they're leaving our country to get their money because they can't bring their money back into our country because of bureaucratic red tape, because they can't get together, because we have a president that can't sit them around a table and get them to approve something. And here's the thing, Republicans and Democrats agree that this should be done. $2.5 trillion. I happen to think it's double that. It's probably $5 trillion that we can't bring into our country, Lester. And with a little leadership, you'd get it in here very quickly, and it could be put to use on the inner cities and lots of other things, and it would be beautiful. But we have no leadership. And honestly, that starts with Secretary Clinton.
All right, you have 2 minutes on the same question to defend tax increases on the wealthiest Americans, Secretary Clinton.
I have a feeling that by the end of this evening, I'm going to be blamed for everything that's ever happened.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah, why not? You know, just join the debate by saying more crazy things. Now, let me say
there's nothing crazy about not letting our companies bring their money back into their country.
This is Secretary Clinton's 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, well, let's start the clock again, Lester. We've looked at your tax proposals. I don't see changes in the corporate tax rates or the kinds of proposals you're referring to that would cause the repatriation, bringing back of money that's stranded overseas. I happen to support that. I happen to support that in a way that will actually work to our benefit. But when I look at what you have proposed, you have what is called now the Trump loophole, because it would so advantage you and the business you do. You've proposed an approach that has a $4 billion tax benefit for your family. And when you look at what you are proposing, it is, as I said, trumped up trickle down. Trickle down did not work. It got us into the mess we were in 2008 and 9. Slashing taxes on the wealthy hasn't worked, and a lot of really smart, wealthy people know that. And they are saying, hey, we need to do more to make the contributions we should be making to rebuild the middle class. I don't think top-down works in America. I think building the middle class, investing in the middle class, making college debt-free so more young people can get their education, helping people refinance their debt from college at a lower rate. Those are the kinds of things that will really boost the economy. Broad-based, inclusive growth is what we need in America, not more advantages for people at the very top.
Mr. Trump,
Typical politician.
So just to be clear, Donald Trump, in fact, did propose major cuts to corporate taxes and also, I believe, eliminating the inheritance tax. So he is, in fact, talking about major cuts in taxes for the wealthy. And I also want to clarify that Democrats and Republicans both have a history of cutting taxes on the wealthy. Bush provided trillions of dollars in the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy. And Barack Obama then, to some people's surprise, went on to make the temporary Bush tax cuts for the rich permanent. So both parties have a history of giving it away to the very wealthy and shifting the tax base from corporations and the wealthy onto the middle class and working people. So that needs to be reversed, and we call for increasing what I call the aristocracy tax, because America was not supposed to have an aristocracy, yet wealth has been so enormously concentrated into a few hands to where 22 billionaires now have as much as 50% of the American population. So we need an inheritance tax. We need a more steeply graduated progressive income tax so that the super rich are paying more and are paying their fair share up at least the 55 to 60% level. In addition to a fair tax structure and investing in the American people, we need a healthcare system that gets healthcare off the backs of everyday people, families, and particularly small businesses. And we can do that with a Medicare for all health insurance plan that provides health care to everyone. We also call for, as I mentioned before, ending student debt and making public higher education free. It pays for itself 7 to 1. For every dollar we put in, we get back $7 in return. So this is a very effective investment in our economy, in our future, and in the generation that will lead us forward into the economy of the 21st century.
Almost $800 billion a year. You know what that is? That means who's negotiating these trade deals? We have people that are political hacks negotiating our trade deals.
The IRS says an audit of your taxes, you're perfectly free to release your taxes during an audit. And so the question, does the public's right to know outweigh your personal?
Well, I told you, I will release them as soon as the audit. Look, I've been under audit almost for 15 years. I know a lot of wealthy people that have never been audited. I said, you get audited? I get audited almost every year. And in a way, I should be complaining. I'm not even complaining. I don't mind it. It's almost become a way of life. I get audited by the IRS, but other people don't. I will say this. We have a situation in this country that has to be taken care of. I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes. When she releases her 33,000 emails that have been deleted, as soon as she releases them, I will release my tax returns, and that's against my lawyers. They say don't do it. I will tell you this. No, in fact, watching shows, reading the papers, almost every lawyer says you don't release your returns until the audit's complete. When the audit's complete, I'll do it. But I would go against them if she releases her.
So it's negotiable?
It's not negotiable. No, let her release the email. Why did she delete 33,000?
Well, I'll let her ask that, but let me just admonish the audience one more time. There was an agreement. We did ask you to be silent, so it would be helpful for us. Secretary Clinton.
Well, I think you've just seen another example of bait and switch here. For 40 years, everyone running for president has released their tax returns. You can go and see nearly, I think, 39, 40 years of our tax returns, but everyone has done it. We know the IRS has made clear there is no prohibition on releasing it when you're under audit. So you've got to ask yourself, why won't he release his tax returns? And I think there may be a couple of reasons. First, maybe he's not as rich as he says he is. Second, maybe he's not as charitable as he claims to be. Third, we don't know all of his business dealings, but we have been told through investigative reporting that he owes about $650 million to Wall Street and foreign banks. Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So if he's paid zero, that means zero for troops, zero for vets, zero for schools or health. And I think probably he's not all that enthusiastic about having the rest of our country see what the real reasons are, because it must be something really important, even terrible, that he's trying to hide. And the financial disclosure statement, they don't give you the tax rate. They don't give you all the details that tax returns would. And it just seems to me that this is something that the American people deserve to see. And I have no reason to believe that he's ever going to release his tax returns, because there's something he's hiding. And we'll guess. We'll keep guessing at what it might be that he's hiding. But I think the question is...
I think they're both right. I think the American people deserve disclosure. Instead of their arguing about who is the bigger corporate crook, I think they all need to just level with the American people. I think the American people do deserve to know what Hillary Clinton was doing with her time while on the company payroll. And if half of her emails were declared private, while working a very busy job for the Secretary of State, that's an issue. If half of your emails on the job are for your personal interest, that's an issue. What we know about Hillary's dealings with the Prince of Bahrain arming the tyrant with a history of human rights abuses, providing a Russian corporation with 20% of the U.S. uranium supply is of concern. But on the other hand, what we know about Trump's dealings, his businesses are extremely of concern, where he, for example, with this investigative report from Newsweek, is involved in his business with the family of an Iranian involved in laundering money for the Iranian military. So Donald Trump appears to have a vast network of extremely unsavory and illegal connections that the American people deserve to know about. That may be why he's not releasing his tax returns. I think the American people deserve to know. But beyond that, we also deserve a politics of integrity. What you hear in their discussions here about what they're trying to hide is a merger of the economic and political elite that does not serve the American people, that does not serve the half of Americans who are struggling to stay out of poverty, does not serve the African Americans who are struggling against police violence and to stay out of the racist prison system. We need a politics of integrity where our government is not being funded by the big banks, the predatory fossil fuel companies, and the war profiteers who are subsidizing their campaigns, who provide the support for the Democratic and Republican parties. I'm the only candidate in this race that does not take money from lobbyists. I don't take money, from corporate interests. And I do not take money from super PACs and do not have a super PAC. So I'm the one candidate that actually has the liberty to support what the American people are clamoring for. And I think the American people deserve to know about all their choices here and the significance of those choices.
We're a serious debtor nation, and we have a country that needs new roads, new tunnels, new bridges, new airports, new schools, new hospitals. And we don't have the money because it's been squandered on so many of your ideas.
Let you
And
respond
maybe
and we'll
because
do
you
next.
haven't paid any federal income tax for a lot of years. And the other thing I think is important
It would
to
be
point out
squandered too, believe me.
If your main claim to be president of the United States is your business, then I think we should talk about that. You know, your campaign manager said that you built a lot of businesses on the backs of little guys. And indeed, I have met a lot of the people who were stiffed by you and your businesses, Donald. I've met dishwashers, painters, architects, glass installers, marble installers, drapery installers, like my dad was, who you refused to pay when they finished the work that you asked them to do. We have an architect in the audience who designed one of your clubhouses at one of your golf courses. It's a beautiful facility. It immediately was put to use, and you wouldn't pay what the man needed to be paid, what he was charging you.
Maybe he didn't do a good job, but I was unsatisfied with his work, which our country should do too.
The thousands of people that you have stiffed over the course of your business not deserve some kind of apology from someone who has taken their labor, taken the goods that they produced, and then refused to pay them. I can only say that I'm certainly relieved that my late father never did business with you. He provided a good middle-class life for us, but the people he worked for, he expected the bargain to be kept on both sides. And when we talk about your business, you've taken business bankruptcy 6 times. There are a lot of great business people that have never taken bankruptcy once. You call yourself the king of debt. You talk about leverage. You even at one time suggested that you would try to negotiate down the national debt of the United States. Well, sometimes there's not a direct transfer of skills from business to government, But sometimes what happened in business would be really bad for government.
Let's let Mr.
And
Trump.
we need
So, yeah, I
to
think
be
it's-
very
I do think
clear
it's,
about that.
Look, it's all words, it's all sound bites. I built an unbelievable company, some of the greatest assets.
I appreciate Hillary Clinton's truth-telling about Donald Trump. And I would add to that, aside from screwing his workers and sending his jobs overseas, he also, is taken into court for having cheated on the students who were at Trump University, taking large sums of tuition that these poor and working class students did not have readily, and essentially not delivering. So he's currently in court. I believe there are hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 court cases that Donald Trump has been involved in, which speaks to the kind of integrity that he brings to politics. Hillary Clinton has a track record as well that's important to be mindful of. Hillary Clinton helped lead the way to dismantling aid to families with dependent children. That also had hurtful consequences. That put over 1 million children into poverty, children in needy families, by destroying that social safety net. Hillary Clinton led the charge to push down the abysmal poverty wages in Haiti in order that American corporations could be making bigger profits. Hillary Clinton supported her husband's bill to establish a whole new approach to crime, the so-called omnibus crime bill of the 1990s, which opened the floodgates to mass incarceration and the unconscionable disproportionate incarceration of people of color. So there's a track record here on both parts because both of these candidates, are part of the culture of the economic elite. The American people deserve policies, and I think representatives who are not taking the money from corporate America. Thank you.
African Americans by police, as we've seen recently in Charlotte and Tulsa. Race has been a big issue in this campaign, and one of you is going to have to bridge a very wide and bitter gap. So how do you heal the divide? Secretary Clinton, you get 2 minutes on this.
Well, you're right. Race remains a significant challenge in our country. Unfortunately, race still determines too much. Often determines where people live, determines what kind of education in their public schools they can get, and yes, it determines how they're treated in the criminal justice system. We've just seen those two tragic examples in both Tulsa and Charlotte. And we've got to do several things at the same time. We have to restore trust between communities and the police. We have to work to make sure that our police are using the best training, the best techniques, that they're well prepared to use force only when necessary. Everyone should be respected by the law, and everyone should respect the law. Right now, that's not the case in a lot of our neighborhoods. So I have, ever since the first day of my campaign, called for criminal justice reform. I've laid out a platform that I think would begin to remedy some of the problems we have in the criminal justice system. But we also have to recognize, in addition to the challenges that we face with policing, there are so many good, brave police officers who equally want reform. So we have to bring communities together in order to begin working on that as a mutual goal. And we've got to get guns out of the hands of people who should not have them. The gun epidemic is the leading cause of death of young African American men, more than the next 9 causes put together. So we have to do 2 things, as I said. We have to restore trust, we have to work with the police, we have to make sure they respect the communities and the communities respect them, and we have to tackle the plague of gun violence, which is a big contributor to a lot of the problems that we're seeing today.
All right, Mr. Trump, you have 2 minutes. How do you heal the divide?
Well, first of all, Secretary Clinton doesn't want to use a couple of words, and that's law and order. And we need law and order. If we don't have it, we're not going to have a country. And when I look at what's going on in Charlotte, a city I love, a city where I have investments, when I look at what's going on throughout various parts of our country, whether it's, I mean, I can just keep naming them all day long. We need law and order in our country. And I just got today, as you know, the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police. We just came in. We have endorsements from, I think, almost every police group, a large percentage of them in the United States. We have a situation where we have our inner cities, African Americans, Hispanics, are living in hell because it's so dangerous. You walk down the street, you get shot. In Chicago, they've had thousands of shootings, thousands, since January 1st. Thousands of shootings. And I'm saying, where is this? Is this a war-torn country? What are we doing? And we have to stop the violence. We have to bring back law and order in a place like Chicago where thousands of people have been killed, thousands over the last number of years. In fact, almost 4,000 have been killed since Barack Obama became president. Almost 4,000 people in Chicago have been killed. We have to bring back law and order. Now, whether or not in a place like Chicago you do stop and frisk, which worked very well, Mayor Giuliani is here, worked very well in New York. It brought the crime rate way down. But you take the gun away from criminals that shouldn't be having it. We have gangs roaming the street. And in many cases, they're illegally here, illegal immigrants. And they have guns. And they shoot people. And we have to be very strong. And we have to be very vigilant. We have to know what we're doing. Right now, our police, in many cases, are afraid to do anything. We have to protect our inner cities because African American communities are being decimated by crime.
Your 2 minutes expired, but I do want to follow up. Stop and frisk was ruled unconstitutional in New York because it largely...
So, yeah, I was about to say something about stop and frisk as well. It was a disaster for human rights. Actually, crime rates were falling in many cities at the same time, so it would be a mistake to attribute decreasing crime rates to stop and frisk, which was a horrific assault on communities of color. Let's also be clear about law and order. The place where we need law and order more than anywhere else is on Wall Street because all the cops have basically been laid off on Wall Street. Wall Street used to have thousands of agents that would enforce law and order on Wall Street. They were basically sent home, and it was under those circumstances that Wall Street crashed. But the agents, the FBI agents, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission agents, the Department of Justice attorneys are still missing in action. They need to be brought back, and we need law and order on Wall Street. Let's also set the record straight. Immigrants are among the most nonviolent, law-abiding groups out there. So it is absolutely false for Donald Trump to be fear-mongering against immigrants as a community of violence. In terms of the racial divides, yes, we have a terrible racial divide, and let's be clear, this didn't just happen. Slavery didn't, disappear from the face of the earth. When the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, slavery gave way to lynchings, which gave way to Jim Crow, redlining, segregation, mass incarceration, the war on drugs, and police violence. So we have a significant problem here. People are afraid, are mired in fear, and we need to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, much like was done in Ferguson there, where they brought art and music and poetry and personal narratives to the table to help us move to a different place, a place of understanding and common ground. And we can do away with the epidemic of police violence by establishing civilian review boards and independent investigators so that we bring accountability to bear here, because there has been none. Communities need to be in charge of their police, not have police in charge of their communities.
There's a lot that we should be proud of and we should be supporting and lifting up. But we do always have to make sure we keep people safe. There are the right ways of doing it, and then there are ways that are ineffective. Stop and frisk was found to be unconstitutional, and in part because it was ineffective. It did not do what it needed to do. Now, I believe in community policing. And in fact, violent crime is 1/2 of what it was in 1991. Property crime is down 40%. We just don't want to see it creep back up. We've had 25 years of very good cooperation, but there were some problems, some unintended consequences. Too many young African American and Latino men ended up in jail for nonviolent offenses, and it's just a fact that if you're a young African American man and you do the same thing as a young white man, you are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and incarcerated. So we've got to address the systemic racism in our criminal justice system. We cannot just say law and order. We have to say, we have to come forward with a plan that is going to divert.
So we need to address the systemic racism, not only in policing, but also in the courts, in our prisons, in our economy, for example, where African Americans have now approximately 5 cents on the dollar of wealth, African Americans relative to the Caucasian community, 5 cents on the dollar. This is just an unconscionable economic racial disparity with real consequences. Educational disparities as well, in which it's the schools, the public schools in communities of color, poor communities of color, that have been subject to school closures, to privatization, and to charterization, which has been extremely harmful and hurtful to those communities. Across the board, you can look at health, for example, where the average survival of the African American is 7 years less, 7 years taken off the life of an average African American simply for being black, and another 7 years taken off the average African American life when that is compounded by poor education. So we're calling, in fact, for a reparations program to erase the cumulative burden of these disparities, these unconscionable disparities over time, and to actually put us back to being a whole community without these egregious and unconscionable disparities and hardships that have been historically imposed on the African American community.
But when it comes to policing, since it can have literally fatal consequences, I have said in my first budget we would put money into that budget to help us deal with implicit bias by retraining a lot of our police officers. I met with a group of very distinguished, experienced police chiefs a few weeks ago. They admit it's an issue. They've got a lot of concerns. Mental health is one of the biggest concerns because now police are having to handle a lot of really difficult mental health problems on the street. They want support. They want more training. They want more assistance. And I think the federal government could be in a position where we would offer and provide that.
I'd like to respond.
Please.
First of all, I agree, and a lot of people, even within my own party, want to be...
Absolutely, police need training in de-escalation techniques. Right now, the common technique and philosophy of policing uses what's called broken windows, which is an extremely offensive, confrontational form of policing that has disastrous consequences. So we need to change the culture of policing. We need to also change who gets hired in policing so that we're not just taking people straight out of service in the military and leading them to think that they now become an occupying force in our African American communities. Likewise, we need to stop this militarization of the police. We should not have police loaded up with gear that the military no longer needs. We should not have armored vehicles and tanks and automatic weapons and riot gear as standard police equipment. You don't need a SWAT team in order to deliver a traffic ticket. We need also to be sure that police forces look like their communities as well, so that there is a common culture between them.
It's like supposed to be good. but we went from 2,200 to 500, and it was continued on by Mayor Bloomberg, and it was terminated by current mayor. But stop and frisk had a tremendous impact on the safety of New York City, tremendous beyond belief. So when you say it has no impact, it really did. It had a very, very big impact.
Well, it's also fair to say, if we're going to talk about mayors, that under the current mayor, crime has continued to drop, including murders. So there is.
You're wrong.
No, I'm not.
Murders are up. All right, you check.
New York has done an excellent job, and I give credit. I give credit across the board, going back to mayors, to police chiefs, because it has worked, and other communities need to come together to do what will work as well. Look, one murder is too many, but it is important that we learn about.
So indeed, the murder rate is, in fact, well down compared to the 1990s, though it has had some recent increases. It is still far below what it used to be. But it's, it's very important to look at also the underlying causes here of community violence. And in a city like Los Angeles, for example, half of the city's budget is actually being used right now for policing. It's like for the United States, half of our budget is being spent on the military right now, which deprives other elements of society of the support that they need. So how about we use some of that money for actually creating jobs programs for youth, for addressing high-risk youth, for ensuring that we have social workers in the schools, for ensuring that we have after-school programs, and the kinds of things, and quality schools, so that young people are not sort of abandoned to a desperate and hopeless future and push down the school-to-prison pipeline. We can prevent this kind of violence. As Martin Luther King said, violence is not simply the absence of peace and security are not simply the absence of violence, they are the presence of justice.
That's okay. But I will tell you, I've been all over, and I've met some of the greatest people I'll ever meet within these communities, and they are very, very upset with what their politicians have told them and what their politicians have done.
I think Donald just criticized me for preparing for this debate. And yes, I did. And you know what else I prepared for? I prepared to be president. And I think that's a good thing.
Mr. Trump, for 5 years, you perpetuated a false claim that the nation's first black president was not a natural-born citizen. You questioned his legitimacy. In the last couple of weeks, you acknowledge what most Americans have accepted for years. The president was born in the United States. Can you tell us what took you so long?
I'll tell you just very simple to say. Sidney Blumenthal works for the campaign and very close friend of Secretary Clinton. And her campaign manager, Patty Doyle.
It's really, what can I say, telling that this is a subject of conversation here in the debate. Donald Trump's obsession with this idea, this mythology that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. How much of concern is this really to the American people? The American people need jobs, we need good wages, we need a national living wage standard of at least $15 an hour, we need health care as a human right, we need to end the war on drugs and ensure that we are not throwing hundreds of thousands of young people into prison for using a substance, marijuana, which is far safer than alcohol and tobacco, which are perfectly legal. We need to empty our jails of the people who have been wrongly incarcerated for the use of a substance which is essentially not harmful relative to other things. So we've got a lot that's important to talk about. Talking about Donald Trump's obsession with Barack Obama's place of birth is not worthy of our time.
I got him to produce the birth certificate, and I think I did a good job. Secretary Clinton also fought it. I mean, now everybody in mainstream is going to say, oh, that's not true. Look, it's true. Sidney Blumenthal sent a reporter. You just have to take a look at CNN last week, the interview with your former campaign manager, and she was involved. But just like she can't bring back jobs, she can't produce. I'm sorry,
So let me say a word about the climate crisis, because nobody's talking about it, and I think that's more important actually than Donald Trump's fantasy here. So the science is telling us now, that we are facing month after month now new all-time world records for setting heat records for these months. We've had fires raging across the West Coast. We have established drought in the Southeast. We've just had major floods in southern Louisiana, many other areas of the country. And the science is telling us we can expect as much as 9 feet of sea level rise as soon as 2050. This is the most recent study published by James Hansen. So we do have a climate emergency. We need to move on this now. We need politicians and elected leaders who, in fact, are accountable and responsible to the American people, who are not being paid by the fossil fuel industry to either deny the climate science in Donald Trump's case or in Hillary Clinton's case, to be promoting fracking, which is as deadly actually as coal. Coal, which Donald supports, is phasing itself out. It's no longer economically viable, but Hillary Clinton is initiating a whole new generation of destructive and unconscionable fossil fuel infrastructure now by promoting fracking, which she did as the Secretary of State. She had a whole office to promote fracking around the world. Her transition director, Ken Salazar, is himself a big booster for fracking. So I'd say for those who care about the climate, it's really important now for us to step up to the plate and for us to do like the indigenous people at Standing Rock Sioux Nation Reservation, who stood up for what is essential. We need to actually stand up now, not buy into this lesser evil mythology, and insist on the substantive policies we need now in order to ensure that that we have a climate and a planet to be here for our kids. Thank you.
Used against him, but I like to remember what Michelle Obama said in her amazing speech at our Democratic National Convention. When they go low, we go high. And Barack Obama went high, despite Donald Trump's best efforts to bring him down.
Mr. Trump, you can respond, then we're going to move on
I
to
would
the next
love to
segment.
respond. First of all, I got to watch, in preparing for this, some of your debates against Barack Obama. You treated him with terrible disrespect. And I watched the way you talk now about how lovely everything is and how wonderful you are. It doesn't work that way. You were after him, you were trying to, you even sent out, or your campaign sent out, pictures of him in a certain garb, very famous pictures, I don't think you can deny that. But just last week, your campaign manager said it was true. So when you try to act holier than thou, it really doesn't work. It really doesn't. Now, as far as the lawsuit, yes, when I was very young, I went into my father's company, had a real estate company in Brooklyn and Queens, and we, along with many, many other companies throughout the country, it was a federal lawsuit, were sued. We settled the suit with no admission of guilt.
Oh, sure.
It was very easy to do, but they sued many people. I notice you bring that up a lot, and I also noticed.
On the issue of race, I think it's very important to acknowledge the transformative role of the Black Lives Matter movement, of people, particularly young people in our communities, who are standing up for the justice that they deserve, who are standing up peacefully, who are standing up to say not one more death, not one more unjustified and violent death at the hands of police. We see case after case and videotape after videotape of these absolutely heart-wrenching stories. It is time, I think, to acknowledge the very powerful role the Black Lives Matter campaign is playing here. Unlike the Democratic Party, which put out a secret memo to just like give them a nod and a pat on the back, but be sure you don't actually make concessions or take their suggestions. In fact, they are leading the way forward. As young African Americans led the way forward during the civil rights movement, they're making an inordinate contribution now to the future that we can have together as a peaceful, just society that that gets past this crisis of racist violence.
Secrets are being stolen. So my question is, who's behind it and how do we fight it? Secretary Clinton, this answer goes to you.
Well, I think cybersecurity, cyber warfare will be one of the biggest challenges facing the next president, because clearly we're facing at this point two different kinds of adversaries. There are the independent hacking groups that do it mostly for commercial reasons, to try to steal information that they then can use to make money. But increasingly, we are seeing cyber attacks coming from states, organs of states. The most recent and troubling of these has been Russia. There's no doubt now that Russia has used cyber attacks against all kinds of organizations in our country, and I am deeply concerned about this. I know Donald's very praiseworthy of Vladimir Putin, but Putin is playing a really tough, long game here. And one of the things he's done is to let loose cyber attackers to hack into government files, to hack into personal files, hack into the Democratic National Committee. And we recently have learned that, that this is one of their preferred methods of trying to wreak havoc and collect information. We need to make it very clear, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, or anybody else, the United States has much greater capacity. And we are not going to sit idly by and permit state actors to go after our information, our private sector information or our public sector information. And we're going to have to make it clear that we don't want to use the kinds of tools that we have. We don't want to engage in a different kind of warfare, but we will defend the citizens of this country. And the Russians need to understand that. I think they've been treating it as almost a probing. How far would we go? How much would we do? And that's why I was so shocked when Donald publicly invited Putin to hack into Americans. That is just unacceptable. It's one of the reasons why 50 national security officials who served in Republican administration have said that Donald is unfit to be the commander-in-chief. It's comments like that that really worry people who understand the threats that we face.
Mr. Trump, you have 2 minutes and the same question. Who's behind it?
I do want to say that I was just endorsed, and more are coming next week. It'll be over 200 admirals, many of them are here, admirals and generals endorsed me to lead this country. That just happened, and many more are coming, and I'm very proud of it. In addition, I was just endorsed by ICE. They've never endorsed anybody before on immigration. I was just endorsed by ICE. I was just recently endorsed 16,500 Border Patrol agents. So when Secretary Clinton talks about this, I mean, I'll take the admirals and I'll take the generals any day over the political hacks that I see that have led our country so brilliantly over the last 10 years with their knowledge, okay? Because look at the mess that we're in. Look at the mess that we're in. As far as the cyber, I agree to parts of what Secretary Clinton said. We should be better than anybody else, and perhaps we're not. I don't think anybody knows it was Russia that broke into the DNC. She's saying Russia, 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 but maybe it was. I mean, it could be Russia, but it could also be China. It could also be lots of other people. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay? You don't know who broke into DNC, but what did we learn with DNC? We learned that Bernie Sanders was taken advantage of by your people, by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Look what happened to her. But Bernie Sanders was taken advantage of. That's what we learned. Now, whether that was Russia, whether that was China, whether it was another country, we don't know. Because the truth is, under President Obama, we've lost control of things that we used to have control over. We came in with the internet, we came up with the internet, and I think Secretary Clinton and myself would agree very much. When you look at what ISIS is doing with the internet, they're beating us at our own game, ISIS. So we have to get very, very tough on cyber and cyber warfare. It is a huge problem. I have a son. He's 10 years old. He has computers. He is so good with these computers. It's unbelievable. The security aspect of cyber is very, very tough, and maybe it's hardly doable. But I will say we are not doing the job we should be doing. But that's true throughout our whole governmental society. We have so many things that we have to do better, Lester, and certainly cyber is one of them.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, I think there are a number of issues that we should be addressing.
So we need an international treaty to prevent cyber warfare. And the Chinese, and I believe the Russians as well, have been trying to get such a treaty going, and our government has been refusing to go along. But I think, we need to listen to the concerns here that have been rightly raised. It's time for such a treaty, and it's time for us to stop thwarting it. We need to move ahead with that. I actually agree with Donald Trump here, strangely enough, that there in fact is no evidence that the Russians were the ones who hacked into the DNC emails. On the other hand, those emails gave plenty of evidence that the DNC was engaged in unfair backroom backstabbing and was really smearing Bernie Sanders through their treatment, their placement of anonymous articles, and so on. So if somebody is messing with the U.S. elections, it was clearly the DNC. There is no evidence that it was the Russians here. One of the heads of national security, in fact, said as much, that there was a whole lot of hyperventilation here, but not a lot of substance. And let me say, on the issue of Edward Snowden, he should certainly be given a pardon. He should be brought home with a hero's welcome. In the words of Benjamin Franklin, those who would compromise privacy in the name of security will wind up losing them both. We can both protect national security at the same time that we protect privacy, and we owe a debt of thanks also to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for exposing the leaks of so many whistleblowers who showed how the U.S. government was engaged in war crimes, in illicit activity, and was doing things in our name that were not legal, and we're not ethical, and we're not moral. So we are the better for those exposures, and both of them should be pardoned and welcomed home. Julian Assange obviously not coming here, but he should certainly be released from his imprisonment in the Ecuadorian embassy and no longer under threat of extradition to the U.S. and persecution, or rather prosecution and persecution for underneath the Espionage Act.
Either because the oil was their primary source of income, and now they have the oil all over the place, including a lot of the oil in Libya, which was another one of her disasters.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, I hope the fact checkers are turning up the volume and really working hard. Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
Wrong.
He actually advocated for the actions we took in Libya and urged that Gaddafi be taken out after actually doing some business with him one time. But the larger point, he says this constantly, is George W. Bush made the agreement about when American troops would leave Iraq, not Barack Obama. And the only way that American troops could have stayed in Iraq is to get an agreement from the then Iraqi government that would have protected our troops. And the Iraqi government would not give that. But let's talk about the question you asked, Lester. The question you asked is, what do we do here in the United States? That's the most important part of this. How do we prevent attacks? How do we protect our people? And I think we've got to have an intelligence surge where we are looking for every scrap of information. I was so proud of law enforcement in New York, in Minnesota.
So let's be clear that we will not have peace and security at home unless we also have peace and security abroad. this hyper beefed up militarism that Hillary Clinton has been practicing. She did lead the charge into the catastrophe of Libya. She did strongly support the war in Iraq, and from all evidence, so did Donald Trump, and he's certainly beating the war drums right now. Let's look at the track record of this military approach to foreign policy. It has created, well, first of all, it has cost us $6 trillion, according to a 2013 Harvard study. $6 trillion for Iraq and Afghanistan alone, when you include the cost of caring for our wounded soldiers, and that's the least that we can do. They deserve better care, in fact. But $6 trillion for those two wars, and add to that 1 million people killed in Iraq, tens of thousands of our soldiers killed and maimed. What do we have to show for it? Mass refugee migrations, failed states, and worse terrorist threats. We need a new approach on our foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy. The American people have had enough of these wars without, in fact, even being told of their cost, which amounts to half of our discretionary budget, and practically half of your income taxes are going to pay for these wars on terror, which only create yet another cycle of terror. There is no military solution to that kind of crisis. We need to create a new offensive in the Middle East, a peace offensive that starts with a weapons embargo and a freeze on the bank accounts of those countries that continue to fund terrorist jihadi enterprises. That is how we get to peace and security overseas and peace and security here, because those wars and the anguish surrounding them are blowing back here. That's what that terrorist threat is about. We can deal with them both by creating a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy.
And contract. And number two, I said, and very strongly, NATO could be obsolete because, and I was very strong on this, and it was actually covered very accurately in the New York Times, which is unusual for the New York Times, to be honest. But I said, they do not focus on terror. And I was very strong, and I said it numerous times, and about 4 months ago, I read on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that NATO is opening up a major terror division. And I think that's great. And I think we should get, because we pay approximately 73% of the cost of NATO, it's a lot of money to protect other people. But I'm all for NATO. But I said they have to focus on terror also, and they're going to do that. And that was, believe me, I'm sure I'm not going to get credit for it, but that was largely because of what I was saying and my criticism of NATO. I think we have to get NATO to go into the Middle East with us, in addition to surrounding nations, and we have to knock the hell out of ISIS, and we have to do it fast. When ISIS formed...
So knocking the hell out of ISIS will be very successful in creating the next generation of terrorism, in the same way that knocking the hell out of Al-Qaeda is what created ISIS out of the chaos of Iraq and Afghanistan. And likewise, Al-Qaeda itself was created by the policy that was not so brilliant in retrospect of creating this international jihadi movement together with the Saudis and the CIA in order to beef up the Mujahideen, a terrorist movement, in order to thwart the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. So this history is coming back to bite us in a very big way. We need a different way forward. Bombing the hell out of terror only creates the next generation of terror. In terms of vacuuming up all the security information we can, what you can be sure is that we will then have an even larger haystack in which the needle cannot be found. We need to protect the rights and the privacy of everyday people, and only go after information where it is warranted. And certainly where it is warranted, we need to use all the techniques of security and surveillance, but not without a warrant and specific cause. Thank you.
I had numerous conversations with Sean Hannity at Fox, and Sean Hannity said, and he called me the other day, and I spoke to him about it. He said you were totally against war because he was for the war.
Why is your judgment better than...
And that was before the war started. Sean Hannity said very strongly to me and other people, he's willing to say it, but nobody wants to call him, I was against the war. He said, you used to have fights with me because Sean was in favor of the war. And I understand that side also, not very much, because we should have never been there. But nobody called Sean Hannity. And then they did an article in a major magazine shortly after the war started, I think in '04, but they did an article which had me totally against the war in Iraq. And one of your compatriots said, you know, whether it was before or right after, Trump was definitely, because if you read this article, there's no doubt. But if somebody, and I'll ask the press, if somebody would call up Sean Hannity,
So, you know, how much time are we going to spend debating what Donald Trump did and didn't say? Who knows? Who cares? What Donald Trump says is not necessarily what Donald Trump does, so I'm not sure that we want to spend too much time on that. In terms of blaming Hillary for the mess in the Middle East, there's no doubt that Hillary played a major role, certainly in the chaos in Libya and in supporting the war in Iraq. Going forward, you know, it's really important that we have a different policy in the Middle East. And again, we call for a peace offensive, not only to end the flow of weapons. We are the major supplier of weapons which get into the hands of combatants on all sides of the issue, not only in the Middle East, but all around the world. So we have enormous potential to start that weapons embargo and to urge the Russians to also come on board. Russia, in fact, is also paying dearly for this, for the terrorism crisis. They cannot afford their military any more than we can afford our military. We need to start working together in a principled collaboration. It's great that we're working together right now, but we're working together for the wrong thing. We're working together to drop more bombs on ISIS, which is not going to be the solution. We need together to bring in all our other allies to actually create a weapons embargo to the region, particularly to Syria, to stop the flow of troops across Turkey's border. And to stop the flow of funding by putting a freeze on the bank accounts. Hillary Clinton herself identified the Saudis as still the major funder of Sunni jihad enterprises in a leaked State Department email when she was Secretary of State. So we got this mess started. We know how to shut it down. The only one benefiting from this insane foreign policy is the weapons industry. It's time to get them out of the business of defining American foreign policy.
Toughest sanctions on Iran. And we did drive them to the negotiating table. And my successor, John Kerry, and President Obama got a deal that put a lid on Iran's nuclear program without firing a single shot. That's diplomacy. That's coalition building. That's working with other nations. The other day, I saw Donald saying that there were some Iranian sailors on a ship in the waters off of Iran, and they were taunting American sailors who were on a nearby ship. He said, you know, if they taunted our sailors, I'd blow them out of the water and start another war. That's not good judgment. That is not the right temperament to be commander-in-chief, to be taunted. And the worst part of what you heard Donald say has been about nuclear weapons. He has said repeatedly that he didn't care if other nations got nuclear weapons, Japan, South Korea, even Saudi Arabia. It has been the policy of the United States, Democrats and Republicans, to do everything we could to reduce the proliferation of nuclear weapons. He even said, well, you know, if there were a nuclear war in the East Asia, well, you know, that's fine. You know, have a good time, folks. And in fact, his cavalier attitude about nuclear weapons is so deeply troubling. That is the #1 threat we face in the world, and it becomes particularly threatening if terrorists ever get their hands on any nuclear material. So a man who can be provoked by a tweet should not have his fingers anywhere near the nuclear codes, as far as I think anyone would.
So when it comes to nuclear weapons, the Obama administration has committed us to $1 trillion on a new generation of nuclear weapons and their modes of delivery. I haven't heard Hillary Clinton give any indication that she would change that course. So we are basically plunging headlong into a new nuclear arms race. And in that context, yes, it would be terrifying for Donald Trump's finger to be on the button, but I will also be terrified if Hillary Clinton's finger is on the button. She, in fact, is pushing for an air war with Russia over Syria. Her stated policy for dealing with Syria is to create a no-fly zone, which means basically that we are at war with other powers that are in that airspace, namely Russia. We now have 2,000 nuclear missiles on hair trigger alert, and Hillary Clinton is fanning the flames of conflict between the U.S. and Russia, both with the movement of NATO troops surrounding Russia on its border, the proliferation of anti-ballistic missiles around its border. This is not the direction we need to go. We need to be moving towards nuclear disarmament, which is a concept that seems to be completely foreign to both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That is the one solution here to the nuclear threats that we are facing. It's not stopping proliferation. It's actually stopping the use of nuclear weapons and their existence for once and for all by moving to nuclear abolition. Not just in our lifetimes, but as an international emergency to do this as quickly as possible.
The other night I was seeing B-52s. They're old enough that your father, your grandfather could be flying them. We are not keeping up with other countries. I would like everybody to end it, just get rid of it, but I would certainly not do first strike. I think that once the nuclear alternative happens, it's over. At the same time, we have to be prepared. I can't take anything off the table because you look at some of these countries, you look at North Korea, we're doing nothing there. China should solve that problem for us. China should go into North Korea. China is totally powerful as it relates to North Korea. And by the way, another one powerful is the worst deal I think I've ever seen negotiated that you started is the Iran deal. Iran is one of their biggest trading partners. Iran has power over North Korea. And when they made that horrible deal with Iran, they should have included the fact that they do something with respect to North Korea. And they should have done something with respect to Yemen and all these other places. And when asked to Secretary Kerry, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you add other things into the deal? One of the great giveaways of all time, including $400 million in cash. Nobody's ever seen that before. That turned out to be wrong. It was actually $1.7 billion in cash. Obviously, I guess, for the hostages, it certainly looks that way. So you say to yourself, why didn't they make the right deal? This is one of the worst deals ever made by any country in history. The deal with Iran will lead to nuclear problems. All they have to do is sit back 10 years, and they don't have to do much, and they're going to end up getting nuclear. I met with Bibi Netanyahu the other day. Believe me, he is not a happy camper.
All right, Mrs. Clinton, Secretary Clinton, you have 2 minutes.
Let me start by saying words matter. Words matter when you run for president, and they really matter when you are president. And I want to reassure our allies in Japan and South Korea and elsewhere that we have mutual defense treaties and we will honor them. It is essential that America's word be good. And so I know that this campaign has caused some questioning and some worries on the part of many leaders across the globe. I've talked with a number of them, but I want to, on behalf of myself and I think on behalf of a majority of the American people, say that, our word is good. It's also important that we look at the entire global situation. There's no doubt that we have other problems with Iran, but personally I'd rather deal with the other problems having put that lid on their nuclear program than still to be facing that. And Donald never tells you what he would do. Would he have started a war? Would he have bombed Iran? If he's going to criticize a deal that has been very successful in giving us access to Iranian facilities that we never had before, then he should tell us what his alternative would be. But it's like his plan to defeat ISIS. He says it's a secret plan, but the only secret is that he has no plan. So we need to be more precise in how we talk about these issues. People around the world follow our presidential campaigns so closely, trying to get hints about what we will do. Can they rely on us? Are we going to lead the world with strength and in accordance with our values? That's what I intend to do. I intend to be a leader of our country that people can count on, both here at home and around the world, to make decisions that will further peace and prosperity, but also stand up to bullies, whether they're abroad or at home. We cannot let those who would try to destabilize the world, to interfere with American interests and security, to be given any opportunities at all.
That's the one thing I'd like to say.
Very quickly.
I will go very quickly, but I will.
So in terms of the Iran deal, this is certainly a good thing to ensure that there will not be a nuclear weapon in the future for Iran. But let's remember, while that Iran deal looked at a future possibility, Iran does not currently have a nuclear weapons program, and according to U.S. security agencies, was not engaged in creating a nuclear weapon program. On the other hand, there are nuclear weapons right now in the hands, for example, of Israel and of Pakistan, which certainly has its issues of instability. So there is good reason for us to have actually broadened that nuclear agreement with Iran, to have created a nuclear-free Middle East as a first step towards achieving a nuclear-free world, and for the U.S. to be leading the way. Rather than beating the war drum and looking for opportunities to beef up our weapons budget, which, as I mentioned, the military now takes half of our discretionary budget. It now takes half of your income tax dollars, 44% to be specific, into this bloated and dangerous military where we have troops in approximately 800 or 1,000 bases in over something like 100 countries around the world. This is bankrupting us. It is not making the world a safer place. It is creating a lot of trigger situations in which we get involved in conflicts, and we create conflicts and exacerbate them. So we need a way forward in which we are not trying to create opportunities for a bigger military budget, in which the weapons industry is basically looking for excuses to provide itself with more funded projects. It's very important. I'm the only candidate in this race that is not taking money from the weapons industry, nor taking money from the fossil fuel industry, which is the purpose of many of these conflicts overseas, in order to defend the sources of our fossil fuels and their routes of transportation. So I think it's very important that the American people have a truly honest broker in the White House who's standing up for what everyday people need, not policies that are getting us into very serious trouble around the world, not making us safer, making us bankrupt, and just creating a very explosive and dangerous future for us all.
One thing, Oscar, is, he tried to switch from looks to stamina. But this is a man who has called women pigs, slobs, and dogs, and someone who has said pregnancy is an inconvenience to employers, who has said women don't deserve equal pay unless they do as good a job as men. And one of the worst things he said was about a woman in a beauty contest. He loves beauty contests, supporting them and hanging around them. And he called this woman Miss Piggy. Then he called her Miss Housekeeping.
So again, a lot of name calling, a lot of, just throwing each other into the mud here, the mud wrestling. The American people deserve better. We deserve a president who is not funded by the weapons industry, the fossil fuel giants, the war profiteers, but who is accountable to you, the American people, and is delivering the future that actually is within our reach when we stand up and demand it. There are 42 million young people who are locked into predatory student loan debt. That alone right there is enough votes to actually win this election. I'm the only candidate who will cancel student debt like we did for Wall Street and bailing out Wall Street. It's time to bail out the students. And with the power of that bailout, we actually have the ability to bring out enough people who could actually take over this election and win it for the future that we deserve, to end student debt, make public higher education free, and create a Green New Deal that will provide an emergency jobs program as well as tackling the crisis of climate change. Thank you.
One of you will not win this election. So my final question to you tonight, are you willing to accept the outcome as the will of the voters? Secretary Clinton?
Well, I support our democracy. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But I certainly will support the outcome of this election. And I know Donald's trying very hard to plant doubts about it, but I hope the people out there understand this election's really up to you. It's not about us so much as it is about you and your families and the kind of country and future you want. So I sure hope you will get out and vote as though your future depended on it, because I think it does.
Mr. Trump, very quickly, the same question. Will you accept the outcome as the will of the voters?
I want to make America great again. We are a nation that is seriously troubled. We're losing our jobs. People are pouring into our country. The other day, we were deporting 800 people, and perhaps they passed the wrong button, they pressed the wrong button, or perhaps, worse than that, it was corruption. But these people that we were going to deport for good reason ended up becoming citizens. And it was 800, and now it turns out it might be 1,800, and they don't even know.
Will you accept
Look,
the
here's the
outcome?
story. I want to make America great again. I'm going to be able to do it. I don't believe Hillary will. The answer is, if she wins, I will absolutely support her.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for us. That concludes our debate for this evening. A spirited one. We covered a lot of ground, not everything, as I suspected we wouldn't.
Great. So I just want to thank all of you for tuning in to the real debate. Americans not only have a right to vote, we have a right to know who we can vote for and what we are voting about in this election, particularly in this election where the establishment candidates have effectively been rejected by the majority of voters who say these are the most disliked and untrusted candidates for president in our history. And in fact, even the majority of their own voters aren't supporting them, but are just really against the other candidate. At the same time, we have a huge majority of the voters that are saying they want to know who the other candidates are. I encourage you to go to my website, Jill2016.com, and join our campaign for open debates. Just today, I heard the new polling result that something like 54% of millennials are considering voting for a third-party candidate and denying their vote to the establishment candidates that are being essentially shoved down our throats. So it's time for us to stand up. In this election, we're not just deciding what kind of a world we will be, but whether we will have a world or not going forward, considering that we have a climate crisis which is barreling down on us, which is only accelerating under Democrats as under Republicans, considering that we have wars that are expanding. They are not contracting, and there is no end in sight, and they are bankrupting us. We have an entire generation of young people who are locked in debt, and we have African Americans whose lives are on the firing line now with this crisis of racial justice and police violence. So we have very serious crises, some of which it's now or never. This is the Hail Mary moment. We need to stand up and take back our future, knowing that we actually have the votes, just from the young people who are in debt alone. We actually have the votes that we could turn this around in real time. So I urge you to reject the propaganda